In a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Everyone knew everyone else, and the days passed in a rhythm of routine. At the heart of this town stood a small white church with a tall steeple that seemed to touch the sky. The church was more than just a building. It was the soul of the community. And at the center of it all was Pastor John, a man whose kindness and humility had earned him the respect and love of nearly everyone who crossed his path. Pastor John wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. He didn't have a booming voice or a commanding presence. Instead, he spoke softly, his words carrying weight because they came from a place of sincerity. Every Sunday, people filled the pews of his church, eager to hear his sermons. They weren't just there for spiritual guidance. They were there because Pastor John had a way of making people feel seen and heard. Whether it was a struggling single mother, a grieving widower, or a teenager searching for purpose, Pastor John always seemed to know exactly what to say. But Pastor John's role extended far beyond the walls of the church. On weekdays, he could often be found visiting the sick in the hospital, offering a listening ear to those burdened by life's challenges, or handing out food to families who struggled to make ends meet. His faith wasn't something he kept locked inside the church. It was alive in everything he did. To many, he was more than a pastor. He was a friend, a counselor, and sometimes even a father figure. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Pastor John prepared for his weekly sermon. The topic on his mind was morality, a subject he believed was essential for living a meaningful life. He wanted to remind his congregation of the importance of doing what was right, even when it was difficult. As he flipped through the pages of his worn Bible, one particular verse caught his eye. It was a passage about standing firm in truth and resisting temptation. To Pastor John, it was a message of hope and encouragement, a reminder that living a righteous life required courage and conviction. That Sunday, the church was unusually full. Word had spread that Pastor John planned to address some controversial topics, though no one could quite figure out why. As he stepped up to the pulpit, the room fell silent. With a warm smile, he greeted his congregation before opening his Bible. His voice echoed gently through the sanctuary as he began to read the verse that had inspired him earlier in the week. He explained its meaning, weaving in stories of biblical figures who had faced trials but remained steadfast in their beliefs. For most of the listeners, it was a powerful and uplifting message, but not everyone felt the same way. Unbeknownst to Pastor John, there was someone in the audience who didn't share the enthusiasm of the others. Sitting near the back of the room was a woman named Linda. She was new to the town and had only recently started attending the church. Unlike many of the regular attendees, Linda wasn't there out of devotion or tradition. She had come out of curiosity, hoping to understand the values that shape the tight-knit community. But as she listened to Pastor John's sermon, something stirred within her, a mix of discomfort and anger. To Linda, the verse Pastor John quoted carried a different meaning. She interpreted it as exclusionary, a message that judged certain lifestyles and beliefs. Her mind raced as she recalled similar passages she'd encountered in the past, ones that had left her feeling alienated and misunderstood. By the time the service ended, Linda's unease had turned into determination. She decided to speak up, believing that silence would only allow such messages to continue unchecked. The following day, Linda filed a formal complaint with the local authorities, accusing Pastor John of promoting hate speech. In her statement, she argued that his use of the Bible verse created an environment of intolerance and division. The news spread quickly, sparking heated debates throughout the town. Some defended Pastor John, insisting that he had simply shared a religious teaching. Others sided with Linda, agreeing that certain interpretations of Scripture could indeed be harmful. What had started as a peaceful Sunday morning soon spiraled into a controversy that divided friends, neighbors, and even families. As the days passed, the tension grew thicker. Local newspapers picked up the story, framing it as a clash between freedom of religion and modern sensibilities. Social media exploded with opinions, each post fueling the fire further. Supporters of Pastor John organized rallies outside the church, holding signs that read "Freedom to Preach and Stand with Faith." Meanwhile, critics held counter-protests, demanding accountability and sensitivity. The once peaceful town now buzzed with arguments, accusations, and frustration. For Pastor John, the situation was overwhelming. He hadn't intended to cause any harm, let alone spark a town-wide debate. Yet, here he was, at the center of a storm he couldn't control. Despite the chaos, he remained calm, trusting that his intentions would eventually be understood. Still, doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. Had he misinterpreted the verse? Could his words have been taken the wrong way? These questions haunted him, but he refused to let them break his spirit. Amid the mounting pressure, the case was brought before the court. A date was set for a hearing, where both sides would present their arguments. The courtroom became the focal point of the dispute, a place where the battle over words and beliefs would reach its peak. Lawyers prepared their cases, witnesses were summoned, and the entire town braced itself for what promised to be a pivotal moment. For Pastor John, the stakes were higher than ever. If convicted, he faced the possibility of jail time, a punishment that seemed unimaginable for a man whose only crime was sharing his faith. Yet, amidst the turmoil, few noticed the quiet figure sitting in the back row of the courtroom during pre-trial hearings. This person, known only as Mr. Thompson, was a retired journalist with a passion for observing human behavior. He had attended countless trials over the years, documenting stories that revealed the complexities of real life. Something about this particular case intrigued him. Perhaps it was the passion on both sides, or maybe it was the underlying fear and misunderstanding driving the conflict. Whatever it was, Thompson sensed that this story was far from ordinary, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Little did anyone know, this unassuming observer would play a crucial role in unraveling the tangled web of emotions and beliefs that had engulfed the town. While the world focused on the legal battle, Thompson saw something deeper, a chance to bridge divides and foster understanding. And so, as the courtroom drama unfolded, he quietly began piecing together a narrative that would change everything. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed to the brim. People from all corners of the town had gathered, eager to witness the outcome of what many considered a bizarre and unprecedented case. Some came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to Pastor John, and a few because they believed justice needed to be served against what they saw as dangerous rhetoric. The air was thick with tension, a mix of anticipation and unease that made it hard for anyone to sit still. As the judge entered the room, everyone rose to their feet. Judge Harris was known for his stern demeanor and no-nonsense approach. With sharp eyes and a gravelly voice, he commanded respect wherever he went. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the crowded room. His gaze lingered briefly on Pastor John, who stood at the defendant's table, flanked by his lawyer. The pastor looked calm but weary, the weight of the situation evident in his tired eyes. The proceedings began with the prosecutor presenting the case against Pastor John. In clear, measured tones, the prosecutor argued that the pastor's use of the Bible verse during his sermon could incite division and promote intolerance. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, addressing the judge, "the language used in this sermon has the potential to alienate and harm members of our community. It goes beyond religious teaching and enters the realm of hate speech." The prosecutor then turned to Linda, the woman who had filed the complaint, asking her to recount how she felt during the sermon. Linda spoke softly but firmly, explaining that the message made her feel judged and excluded. Her testimony painted a picture of vulnerability and fear, emotions that resonated with some in the audience. When it was time for the defense to present its case, Pastor John's lawyer stood up. A seasoned attorney with a reputation for handling difficult cases, he wasted no time in countering the prosecution's arguments. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and confident, "my client is a man of faith who simply shared a passage from the Bible, a text that holds deep meaning for millions of people around the world. To label this act as hate speech is not only unfair, but also an attack on freedom of speech and religious expression." The lawyer then called several witnesses to the stand, including members of Pastor John's congregation. Each one spoke passionately about the pastor's character, describing him as compassionate, inclusive, and dedicated to helping others. One elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, recounted how Pastor John had supported her through the loss of her husband, offering both spiritual guidance and practical assistance. Another witness, a young man struggling with addiction, credited the pastor with helping him turn his life around. Despite the compelling testimonies, Judge Harris remained unmoved. He listened intently, his expression unreadable, as both sides presented their arguments. When it was time for him to speak, the room fell silent. Leaning forward slightly, the judge addressed Pastor John directly. "Mr. John," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "you must understand the gravity of your actions. Words have power, and the words you chose to share in your sermon could be interpreted in ways that cause harm. If you continue to preach such messages without considering their impact, I will have no choice but to hold you accountable." The gavel struck the table with a sharp crack, signaling the end of the session. Everyone sat frozen, the reality of the judge's warning sinking in. Among the sea of faces in the courtroom, one person watched silently, taking in every detail. This was Mr. Thompson, the retired journalist who had been attending trials as part of his hobby. Known locally as the courtroom observer, Thompson had a knack for spotting nuances that others often missed. He wasn't there to take sides. Instead, he wanted to document the story unfolding before him. What intrigued him most about this case was the complexity of the emotions involved. Fear, anger, loyalty, and confusion, all were present in equal measure, creating a tangled web that seemed impossible to untangle. Thompson noticed things that others overlooked. He saw the way Linda clutched her hands tightly together as she testified, her knuckles white with anxiety. He observed the flicker of doubt in Pastor John's eyes when the judge issued his warning. And he caught the subtle exchange of glances between members of the congregation, some nodding in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These small details told a story far richer than any headline or legal argument ever could. After the hearing ended, the crowd spilled out into the hallway, buzzing with conversation. Some voiced their outrage at the judge's decision, while others expressed relief that the matter hadn't been resolved yet. Amid the chaos, Thompson lingered behind, jotting notes in his worn notebook. Unlike the others, he didn't rush to judgment or jump into heated debates. Instead, he approached the situation with curiosity, determined to dig deeper. He wanted to understand not just what had happened, but why it had happened, and what it revealed about the community as a whole. Over the next few days, Thompson immersed himself in the story. He visited the church where Pastor John preached, sitting quietly in the back during a service to observe the atmosphere. He attended community meetings where residents discussed the case, listening carefully to their perspectives. He even reached out to Linda, inviting her to share more about her experiences and motivations. Though hesitant at first, she eventually agreed to meet with him, opening up about her struggles with feeling accepted in a town where tradition often overshadowed individuality. Through these conversations, Thompson began to piece together a clearer picture of the conflict. He realized that the issue wasn't just about free speech or religion, it was about fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of change, and fear of losing one's identity. Both sides felt threatened, and neither was willing to step back and truly listen to the other. For Pastor John and his supporters, the idea of censoring religious teachings felt like an attack on their core beliefs. For Linda and her allies, the thought of allowing messages they perceived as harmful to go unchecked was equally alarming. Armed with this insight, Thompson decided to write an article about the case. But unlike the sensationalized reports flooding social media, his piece aimed to humanize the people involved. He highlighted the stories of those who loved Pastor John, the single mother he had helped find affordable childcare, the teenager he had mentored through tough times. He also gave voice to critics like Linda, acknowledging their concerns and validating their feelings. By weaving together these diverse perspectives, Thompson hoped to foster empathy and understanding, showing that the truth was rarely black and white. When the article was published, it quickly gained attention. Readers were struck by its balanced tone and thoughtful analysis. For the first time, many began to see the humanity on both sides of the debate. Conversations that had once been filled with anger and accusation started to shift. People who had dismissed each other's views began to ask questions, seeking common ground rather than focusing solely on differences. Even Judge Harris read the article, pausing to reflect on the complexities Thompson had uncovered. Inspired by the response, the judge called for a second hearing, inviting Thompson to present his findings in court. Though the journey was far from over, the seeds of change had been planted. Thanks to Thompson's efforts, the town began to move away from division and toward dialogue. It was a slow process, fraught with challenges, but there was hope. And, in a world often dominated by noise and conflict, hope was a powerful thing indeed. The second hearing brought a different kind of energy to the courtroom. Gone was the hostility that had filled the room during the first session. Instead, there was an air of anticipation, as if people weren't sure what to expect but were willing to listen. Judge Harris opened the proceedings by acknowledging the unusual step of inviting Mr. Thompson, the courtroom observer, to speak. It was a bold move, one that signaled a shift in tone from confrontation to understanding. Thompson stood up slowly, adjusting his glasses before addressing the room. His voice was calm and steady, carrying a sense of authority that came not from power but from experience. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about more than words or laws. It's about fear and misunderstanding. Both sides feel attacked and both are searching for validation. What I've learned through my observations is that neither side is entirely wrong, and neither is entirely right." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. He spoke about Pastor John, describing him as a man who genuinely cared for his community. This pastor has spent years helping people, feeding the hungry, comforting the grieving, guiding the lost. His intentions are pure, and his faith drives him to serve others. But good intentions don't always guarantee good outcomes. The verse he quoted, though rooted in Scripture, was interpreted differently by someone in his audience. That doesn't make him guilty of hate speech, but it does mean we need to think carefully about how our words affect those around us. Turning to Linda and her supporters, Thompson acknowledged their pain. Linda came to this town hoping to find acceptance, but instead she felt excluded. Her feelings are valid and her concerns deserve attention. No one should walk away from a sermon, or any public gathering, feeling judged or unwelcome. But labeling every uncomfortable message as harmful doesn't solve the problem either. It only deepens the divide. As Thompson continued, he emphasized the importance of dialogue over division. We live in a world where differences often feel like barriers, but they don't have to be. If we take the time to truly listen to each other, if we focus on finding common ground instead of highlighting our disagreements, we can create something stronger. This isn't just about Pastor John or Linda. It's about all of us learning how to coexist in a way that respects everyone's humanity. His words resonated deeply with those in the courtroom. Even Judge Harris, who rarely showed emotion, nodded thoughtfully as Thompson spoke. When the observer finished, the room remained silent for a moment, as if everyone needed time to process what they had heard. Then, one by one, people began to whisper among themselves, their voices softer and less confrontational than before. After Thompson stepped down, the judge called on Pastor John to address the court. The pastor rose slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the railing in front of him. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking out at the faces in the room. Many were familiar, members of his congregation, friends, neighbors, but some were strangers, people who had come to see him as an adversary. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "I never intended to hurt anyone," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "All I wanted was to share a message of hope and strength. I believe in the teachings of the Bible, but I also believe in love and compassion. If my words caused pain, then I am truly sorry. That was never my goal." He paused, glancing toward Linda, who sat quietly in her seat. "I may not agree with everyone here today, but I respect your right to feel the way you do, and I'm willing to learn, to listen, so that we can move forward together. Linda, visibly moved by Pastor John's sincerity, wiped away a tear. She hadn't expected such humility from someone she had viewed as an opponent. Encouraged by the atmosphere of openness, she stood up as well, addressing the court in a shaky but heartfelt voice. "I came here because I felt hurt," she admitted. "But now I realize that maybe I wasn't the only one feeling afraid. Maybe we're all scared of losing something important to us. Our beliefs, our identities, our sense of belonging. I still think some messages can be harmful, but I also see that shutting down conversations isn't the answer. We need to talk, more not less." Her admission broke the tension in the room, prompting others to speak up. A young man who had grown up attending Pastor John's church shared how the pastor had helped him overcome self-doubt. An older woman, a friend of Linda's, talked about the challenges of adapting to a new town. Each story added another layer to the unfolding narrative, painting a picture of a community grappling with change while trying to hold on to its values. Judge Harris listened intently, his expression softening as the testimonies unfolded. When it was his turn to speak, he chose his words carefully. "What I've seen today gives me hope," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "This isn't just a legal matter anymore. It's a human one. Laws exist to protect us, but they can't force us to understand each other. That's something we have to do ourselves." He turned to Pastor John. "Mr. John, I'm dismissing the charges against you. Your actions weren't malicious, and I believe you when you say you meant no harm. But I urge you, and everyone here, to be mindful of the impact your words can have. Freedom of speech comes with responsibility." The decision sent a ripple of relief through the room, but the real work was just beginning. Inspired by the day's events, Pastor John decided to take action. He invited Linda and other critics to join him in organizing interfaith meetings aimed at fostering understanding. These gatherings would provide a safe space for people to share their perspectives, ask questions, and challenge assumptions. At first, attendance was sparse, with many hesitant to engage, but gradually, more people showed up, drawn by curiosity and a desire to heal old wounds. One particularly memorable meeting featured a lively discussion about the role of religion in modern society. Some argued that faith should adapt to changing times, while others insisted that tradition must be preserved. The conversation grew heated at times, but it never descended into anger. Instead, participants found themselves laughing, sharing personal stories and discovering unexpected similarities. By the end of the evening, even those who had started off as adversaries were exchanging smiles and handshakes. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued to document the transformation taking place in the town. His follow-up articles highlighted the progress being made, celebrating small victories while acknowledging the challenges that remained. Readers from neighboring towns reached out, inspired by the example set by this once divided community. Some even traveled to attend the interfaith meetings, eager to learn how they could bridge divides in their own areas. For Pastor John, the experience changed him in profound ways. He became more intentional about tailoring his sermons to include messages of inclusivity and empathy. He also made a point of reaching out to newcomers in the town, inviting them to coffee or lunch simply to get to know them better. Linda, too, underwent a transformation. She joined the church's outreach committee, working alongside Pastor John to help marginalized groups feel welcomed and valued. As weeks turned into months, the town began to resemble its former self, a place where kindness and cooperation outweighed conflict. Of course, not every issue was resolved. There were still moments of disagreement, times when old fears resurfaced. But the difference now was that people knew how to handle them. They had learned to lean into discomfort rather than shy away from it, trusting that honest conversations could lead to growth. In the end, the controversy that had once threatened to tear the community apart became its greatest teacher. It reminded everyone that behind every argument, every accusation, and every misunderstanding lay a shared humanity. And sometimes, all it took was one person, a retired journalist with a notebook and a passion for storytelling, to remind them of that truth. As the weeks passed, the town began to settle into a new rhythm. The interfaith meetings organized by Pastor John and Linda became a regular part of life, drawing people from all walks of life. These gatherings weren't just about discussing religion or resolving conflicts. They were about building connections. Each meeting started with a simple meal, where participants sat together at long tables laden with food donated by local families. Conversations flowed naturally over plates of homemade casseroles and freshly baked bread, breaking down barriers that formal debates often reinforced. One evening, during one of these dinners, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson struck up a conversation with a young woman named Sarah. Mr. Peterson had grown up in the town and attended Pastor John's church his entire life. Sarah, on the other hand, had moved there recently and didn't consider herself religious. At first, their exchange was polite but cautious, each wary of offending the other. But as they talked, they discovered shared interests: gardening, cooking, and a love for old movies. By the end of the night, they were laughing like old friends, completely forgetting the differences that might have kept them apart before. These small moments of connection added up, creating a ripple effect throughout the community. People who had once avoided each other now greeted one another warmly on the street. Neighbors who had never spoken began exchanging tips on everything from car repairs to raising children. Even those who still disagreed on certain issues found ways to coexist peacefully, respecting each other's boundaries while finding common ground in everyday life. But progress wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks, moments when old tensions flared back to life. One such incident occurred when a local business owner refused service to a same-sex couple, citing personal beliefs. News of the refusal spread quickly, reigniting debates about discrimination versus freedom of conscience. Some rallied behind the business owner, arguing that no one should be forced to act against their values. Others condemned the decision, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone equally. The controversy threatened to undo much of the progress the town had made. Fingers were pointed, tempers flared, and social media erupted with heated arguments. For a while, it seemed as though the fragile peace would shatter under the weight of opposing viewpoints. But this time, something was different. Instead of letting anger take over, many residents turned to the tools they had learned through the interfaith meetings: listening, empathy, and open dialogue. Pastor John played a key role in diffusing the situation. He invited both the business owner and the couple to meet privately, not to argue or assign blame, but to understand each other's perspectives. The meeting was tense at first, with each side expressing frustration and hurt, but as they listened to each other's stories, cracks began to form in the walls of misunderstanding. The business owner explained that his decision hadn't been made out of malice, but out of fear of losing his own identity. The couple, in turn, shared how being turned away had left them feeling invisible and unworthy. By the end of the conversation, neither side had changed their core beliefs, but they had gained a deeper appreciation for the other's humanity. The business owner apologized for the pain he had caused, while the couple acknowledged the complexity of his position. Though the issue itself remained unresolved, the encounter marked a step toward mutual respect, a reminder that even in disagreement, compassion could prevail. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson continued to document the evolving story of the town. His articles captured both the triumphs and the struggles, painting a realistic picture of what it meant to build bridges in a divided world. Readers from across the country followed along, inspired by the resilience and determination of this small community. Some reached out to Thompson asking for advice on how to foster similar initiatives in their own towns. Others simply expressed gratitude for the hope his stories provided in a time of growing polarization. Thompson himself was surprised by the impact of his work. What had started as a hobby, a way to pass the time and satisfy his curiosity, had become something far greater. Through his observations and writings, he had helped spark a movement that extended far beyond the courtroom or the church. People looked to him not just as a journalist, but as a mediator, someone who could see multiple sides of an issue and articulate them clearly. Despite the challenges, the town's transformation was undeniable. It showed in the little things: the smiles exchanged between former adversaries, the willingness to lend a helping hand, the sense of unity at community events. Even Judge Harris noticed the change. During a routine court session months after the initial hearing, he remarked on how the atmosphere in the room felt lighter, less charged with animosity. "It seems this town has learned a valuable lesson," he said with a rare smile. "Justice isn't just about enforcing laws, it's about healing wounds." For Pastor John, the journey had been both humbling and transformative. He had entered the conflict believing he was defending his faith, only to realize that true faith required more than conviction. It demanded understanding. He learned to approach his sermons with greater sensitivity, choosing words that uplifted rather than alienated. He also embraced the idea that leadership wasn't about standing apart, but about walking alongside others, sharing their burdens and celebrating their joys. Linda, too, emerged stronger from the experience. She had come to the town feeling like an outsider, burdened by fears of rejection. But through her involvement in the interfaith meetings and her interactions with Pastor John, she found a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. Her voice, once hesitant and uncertain, grew confident as she advocated for inclusivity and acceptance. She became a bridge builder herself, encouraging others to speak up and share their stories. The town's newfound harmony didn't mean the end of challenges. Change, after all, is rarely linear. There were still days when disagreements arose, when old habits resurfaced, or when progress felt painfully slow. But the difference now was that people approached these obstacles with patience and perseverance. They understood that unity wasn't about erasing differences. It was about embracing them, finding strength in diversity rather than seeing it as a threat. One crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after the initial controversy, the town held a special event to celebrate how far they had come. The gathering took place in the park, where colorful leaves blanketed the ground and the air carried a hint of wood smoke. Long tables were set up beneath strings of twinkling lights, and a stage stood at one end, ready to host performances and speeches. Pastor John was among the speakers, addressing the crowd with heartfelt gratitude. "We've been through a lot together," he said, his voice warm and steady. "There were times when I wondered if we'd ever find our way forward. But look at us now. Look at what we've built, not just a community but a family." His words drew applause, echoing through the park as people cheered and clapped. When it was Linda's turn to speak, she stepped onto the stage with quiet confidence. "I used to think this town wasn't for me," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But you proved me wrong. You welcomed me, listened to me, and taught me that change is possible when we work together. Thank you for showing me what it means to truly belong." As the celebration continued, laughter and music filled the air. Children ran around playing games, couples danced to live music, and friends hugged tightly, savoring the moment. It was a scene of joy and connection, a testament to the power of empathy and effort. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for now, the town reveled in the knowledge that they had overcome division and emerged stronger for it. In the corner of the park, Mr. Thompson watched silently, scribbling notes in his notebook. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was merely another chapter. But as he looked around at the smiling faces and heard the sounds of laughter and singing, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why he did what he did, to remind people that even in the face of conflict, hope and understanding could prevail. And in that moment, surrounded by a community united in purpose, he couldn't help but smile. The months that followed the town's autumn celebration brought a renewed sense of purpose to its residents. The spirit of unity that had been sparked by the interfaith meetings and nurtured through countless conversations now seemed to permeate every corner of daily life. People weren't just coexisting, they were actively working together to make their community stronger. From volunteer projects to shared meals, the town buzzed with energy as neighbors rediscovered what it meant to truly care for one another. One of the most visible changes was the transformation of the park where the autumn celebration had taken place. For years it had been neglected, a patch of overgrown grass and cracked sidewalks that few people visited. But inspired by the momentum of recent events, a group of volunteers came together to revitalize the space. Pastor John played a key role in organizing the effort. rallying church members, local businesses, and even former critics like Linda to pitch in. Over several weekends, they cleared weeds, planted flowers, and painted benches. By the time the project was complete, the park had become a vibrant gathering spot, filled with laughter and activity. It wasn't just the physical appearance of the park that changed. Its purpose evolved too. What had once been an underused stretch of land became a hub for community events. On sunny afternoons, families picnicked beneath shady trees, while children chased each other across the grass. In the evenings, musicians performed on makeshift stages, drawing crowds of all ages. Even winter didn't dampen the park's appeal. During colder months, residents gathered around fire pits, sipping hot cocoa and swapping stories. The revitalized park symbolized something deeper, a shift in how people viewed themselves and their roles within the community. No longer were they isolated individuals focused solely on their own lives. Instead, they saw themselves as part of a larger whole, connected by shared goals and values. This newfound sense of belonging extended beyond social gatherings. It influenced how people approached challenges, both big and small. For instance, when a severe storm swept through the area, knocking out power and flooding streets, the town responded with remarkable resilience. Neighbors checked on one another, offering shelter to those without electricity and pooling resources to help clean up the damage. A group of teenagers, many of whom had previously been seen as indifferent or disengaged, took the lead in organizing a cleanup crew. Armed with shovels and trash bags, they worked tirelessly alongside adults, earning praise from everyone who witnessed their efforts. Even Judge Harris noticed the change. During routine court sessions, he often remarked on how disputes between residents were resolved more quickly and amicably than before. "It seems you've learned to talk things out instead of letting them fester," he said during one hearing, addressing two neighbors who had reached a compromise over a property line disagreement. His words reflected a broader truth. The town's culture of communication and empathy was making a tangible difference in everyday interactions. Amid these positive developments, Mr. Thompson continued to observe and document the town's progress. His articles celebrated not only the large-scale transformations, but also the quieter, more personal moments that revealed the depth of the community's growth. He wrote about a young boy named Tommy, whose family had struggled financially after his father lost his job. When word spread about their situation, neighbors rallied to support them, donating groceries, offering odd jobs, and even helping fix their leaky roof. It was a small act of kindness, but one that spoke volumes about the town's collective heart. Thompson also highlighted the ongoing interfaith meetings, which had grown in size and scope. What had started as informal discussions had evolved into structured workshops covering topics like cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and mental health awareness. Experts from nearby cities were invited to lead sessions, bringing fresh perspectives and practical tools to the table. Participants left these meetings not just informed, but inspired, eager to apply what they'd learned in their own lives. Despite the progress, challenges still arose. Not everyone embraced the changes happening around them. Some residents clung to old prejudices, uncomfortable with the idea of welcoming outsiders or questioning traditional norms. Others felt overwhelmed by the pace of transformation, longing for the simplicity of days gone by. These tensions occasionally surfaced, reminding everyone that growth often comes with growing pains. One such incident involved a school board meeting where parents debated whether to include books featuring diverse perspectives in the curriculum. Supporters argued that exposing students to different viewpoints would prepare them for a globalized world. Opponents worried that certain materials might undermine long-held values. The debate grew heated, with tempers flaring and accusations flying. For a moment it seemed as though the fragile harmony the town had worked so hard to build might crack under the pressure. But this time, the response was different. Instead of retreating into opposing camps, community leaders, including Pastor John, Linda, and several teachers, called for a town hall meeting to address the issue openly. They encouraged everyone to attend regardless of their stance, promising a safe space for honest dialogue. The turnout was impressive, with nearly 100 people packing into the school auditorium. The meeting began with a simple exercise. Participants were asked to pair up with someone they didn't know well and share a story about a time they had felt misunderstood. This icebreaker set the tone for the rest of the evening, fostering empathy and breaking down barriers. As the discussion unfolded, people listened intently, asking questions rather than making accusations. By the end of the night, no definitive decision had been made about the curriculum, but everyone agreed to keep talking until they found a solution that respected all viewpoints. The school board incident served as a reminder that unity didn't mean uniformity. Differences still existed and disagreements would always arise, but the way people handled those differences had fundamentally changed. They had learned to prioritize understanding over winning, collaboration over division. As winter gave way to spring, the town prepared for another milestone, the anniversary of the initial controversy. To mark the occasion, Pastor John and Linda organized a special event at the newly revitalized park. Dubbed a Day of Reflection and Renewal, it featured speeches, performances, and interactive activities designed to celebrate how far the community had come and to inspire continued growth. On the morning of the event, the park buzzed with excitement. Volunteers scurried about, setting up booths and arranging chairs. Children decorated banners with messages of hope, while musicians tuned their instruments in preparation for the afternoon's concert. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the crowd began to gather, friends, families, and strangers alike, drawn together by a shared desire to honor the journey they had undertaken. When Pastor John took the stage to open the festivities, his voice carried a mix of pride and humility. "Today isn't just about looking back," he said, scanning the sea of faces before him. "It's about looking forward. We've accomplished so much, but our work is far from over. Let's use this day to recommit ourselves to building a community rooted in love, respect, and understanding." Linda followed with her own remarks, her words filled with gratitude. "This town taught me that change is possible when we're willing to listen, to really listen, to one another. So let's keep listening, keep learning, and keep growing. Together, we can create something beautiful." The rest of the day unfolded like a tapestry of connection and joy. Workshops focused on topics like mindfulness, storytelling, and environmental stewardship drew enthusiastic participation. A panel discussion featuring community leaders explored ways to sustain the momentum of recent months. And throughout it all, laughter and music provided a joyful backdrop, underscoring the sense of celebration. As evening fell and the event drew to a close, Mr. Thompson stood at the edge of the park, watching as the last of the attendees drifted away. In his hand he held his notebook, its pages filled with observations and reflections. Though he had chronicled countless stories over the years, this one felt uniquely significant, a testament to the power of empathy, dialogue, and determination. For the residents of the town, the day marked not an ending, but a beginning. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments of uncertainty and doubt. But they also knew they had the tools to face them, with courage, compassion, and a steadfast belief in the strength of their community. As they walked home beneath a canopy of stars, they carried with them not just memories of the day, but a renewed commitment to the future they were shaping together. The months that followed the anniversary celebration brought a sense of stability to the town, but also a quiet determination to keep pushing forward. The lessons learned from the past year had taken root, shaping how people interacted with one another and approached challenges. It wasn't just about avoiding conflict anymore. It was about actively seeking ways to grow together, even when growth felt uncomfortable. One of the most significant changes was the emergence of new leaders within the community. Pastor John and Linda, who had once been at odds, now worked side by side as trusted figures in the town. But they weren't alone. Others stepped up too, young and old, religious and secular, newcomers and lifelong residents, all contributing their unique strengths to the ongoing effort to build a stronger, more inclusive community. Take Sarah, for example. She was the same young woman who had bonded with Mr. Peterson over gardening during one of the interfaith meetings. Inspired by the connections she'd made, Sarah started a community garden in an empty lot near the park. What began as a small project quickly grew into something much larger. People donated seeds, tools, and time, transforming the neglected space into a thriving oasis of greenery. The garden became more than just a place to grow vegetables. It was a gathering spot where neighbors shared stories, exchanged tips, and built friendships. Even Judge Harris found himself playing a role in this evolving dynamic. Though his position required him to remain impartial, he couldn't help but notice the positive impact of the town's efforts. During court sessions, he often encouraged defendants and plaintiffs to resolve disputes outside of the courtroom, suggesting mediation or community service as alternatives to fines and penalties. His approach earned praise from many, including those who had initially seen him as overly strict. As spring turned to summer, the town faced its biggest test yet, a severe drought that threatened local farms and water supplies. For weeks, the sun blazed down without mercy, drying up rivers and leaving fields barren. Farmers struggled to keep their crops alive, while families worried about having enough water for daily needs. Tensions rose as resources dwindled, and there were whispers of blame and frustration. But instead of succumbing to panic, the community came together in remarkable ways. A group of volunteers organized a water-sharing initiative, collecting donations from households with ample supplies and distributing them to those in need. Local businesses pitched in by offering discounts on bottled water and installing tanks to collect rainwater. Even children got involved, setting up lemonade stands not to make money but to raise awareness about conserving water. Pastor John played a key role in coordinating these efforts, using the church as a central hub for planning and distribution. Linda, meanwhile, reached out to environmental experts and advocacy groups, securing advice and support to help the town navigate the crisis. Together, they reminded everyone that resilience wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about finding creative solutions and leaning on one another. The drought eventually broke, thanks to a series of late summer storms that replenished the parched land. When the rains finally came, the entire town gathered in the park to celebrate. Children danced in puddles while adults hugged each other, laughing through tears of relief. It was a moment of pure joy, a reminder of how far they had come since the days when division and mistrust had defined their relationships. As the year drew to a close, Mr. Thompson reflected on everything he had witnessed. His notebook, once filled with observations of tension and fear, now contained stories of hope and transformation. He realized that what had started as a simple courtroom case had blossomed into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of empathy, understanding, and collective action. Thompson decided to write one final article, capturing the essence of the town's journey. In it, he highlighted not just the big events, the drought, the revitalized park, the interfaith meetings, but also the small, everyday acts of kindness that had woven the community together. He wrote about Mrs. Grayson, an elderly widow who baked cookies every week for her neighbors. He described how teenagers volunteered to mow lawns for elderly residents during the hottest days of summer. And he shared the story of a man named Carlos, who had moved to the town after losing his job in another city and found work and friendship through the community garden. His article ended with a powerful message. This town has shown us that unity isn't something we achieve overnight. It's built slowly, day by day, through countless choices to listen, to care, and to act. It's messy and imperfect, but it's worth every effort. Because when we choose connection over division, we create something beautiful, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. The article resonated deeply with readers, both inside and outside the town. Letters poured in from across the country, thanking Thompson for sharing the story and expressing admiration for the community's resilience. Some included donations to support ongoing projects, while others offered words of encouragement and solidarity. The town, once known only for its sleepy charm, had become a symbol of hope and possibility. For Pastor John, Linda, and everyone else involved, the recognition was humbling. They hadn't set out to change the world. They had simply wanted to heal their own corner of it. Yet, in doing so, they had inspired countless others to do the same. Their journey proved that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, Progress was possible when people chose to stand together rather than apart. As winter settled over the town, blanketing rooftops and trees in snow, the spirit of unity remained warm and vibrant. Families gathered around fireplaces, sharing meals and laughter. Friends bundled up to sled down hills or skate on frozen ponds, and in the heart of the park, strings of lights twinkled brightly, casting a soft glow over the benches and pathways that had become symbols of renewal. On New Year's Eve, the town held a special celebration to mark the end of a transformative year. The event took place in the park, now a cherished landmark of their shared journey. Long tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, while a band played lively tunes on a makeshift stage. As midnight approached, Pastor John and Linda stood together, holding candles to light the crowd's lanterns. "Tonight," Pastor John said, his voice steady and full of emotion, "we don't just say goodbye to the past year. We welcome the future with open hearts and open minds. Let's remember that no matter what comes our way, we are stronger together." Linda nodded, adding her own thoughts. "We've learned that change is hard, but it's also beautiful. So, let's keep listening, keep learning, and keep building the kind of community we want to leave behind." As the clock struck 12, the park erupted in cheers and applause. Lanterns floated into the night sky, carrying wishes and dreams for the year ahead. Among the crowd, Mr. Thompson watched silently, his notebook tucked safely in his coat pocket. He didn't need to write anything down. The scene before him said it all. In that moment, surrounded by faces lit by candlelight and laughter, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was why he told stories, to remind people of their capacity for goodness, for courage, for love. And as the first snowflakes of the new year began to fall, he knew the town's journey was far from over. It was a story still being written, one chapter at a time, by the very people living it.